Around 70,000 years ago, something almost killed us all. The human population crashed. Hard. We went from maybe 1 million people down to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. That's it. That's everyone. All the humans left on Earth could fit in a small town. We almost went extinct. This wasn't a war. It wasn't a plague. It was a volcano. Mount Toba in Indonesia. When it erupted, it was the largest volcanic event in 2 million years. The explosion sent ash into the stratosphere. The sky darkened. Temperatures dropped. Some scientists think global temperatures fell by 15 degrees Celsius for 6 years. 6 years of volcanic winter. Think about what that means. Crops fail. Animals die. Water sources freeze. The world becomes a cold, dark place where nothing grows, and somehow we survived. Here's what makes this even stranger. We didn't just survive. We bounced back. Within a few thousand years, humans had spread across the entire planet. We crossed oceans, climbed mountains, adapted to deserts and tundra and rainforests. But first, we had to make it through those 6 years. The genetic evidence is clear. Every human alive today descends from that tiny population. We all carry the signature of that bottleneck in our DNA. When scientists look at human genetic diversity, they see the mark of a massive population crash. It's written in our genes. We came within a few thousand people of disappearing forever. So how did we make it? Nobody knows for sure. But we can make some guesses. Those survivors had to be incredibly adaptable. They had to find food in a world where food was scarce. They had to stay warm in the cold. They had to work together. Maybe they moved to the coast. Fish don't care if the sky is dark. The ocean keeps producing. Some scientists think small groups survive near the shore in Africa, protected by the ocean's stable temperatures, fed by seafood. Maybe they found caves, deep places where they could escape the cold, where they could keep fires burning, where a small group could huddle together and wait out the darkness. Or maybe they just got lucky. Here's what we know for certain. Those few thousand people carried something special, the ability to adapt, to innovate, to refuse to give up. They passed that resilience down to us. We are the descendants of the people who survived the impossible. Every human alive today comes from a population that should have died out, but didn't. They held on. They adapted. They survived 6 years of darkness and cold, and then they thrived. That's our origin story. Not gods or gardens, just a few thousand people who refused to quit. The genetic bottleneck left us with less diversity than most species. Chimpanzees have more genetic variation than humans. So do gorillas. We're all surprisingly similar because we all came from that tiny group, but we made it. Against odds that should have been impossible. And now, there are 8 billion of us. We weren't the only ones trying to survive. While we struggled through those 200,000 years, we had company. Other human species. They walked the same lands, hunted the same animals, felt the same cold, and they were watching us. Think about that for a second. You're not the only kind of human on Earth. There are others. They look different. They think different, but they're human enough that you recognize something familiar in their eyes. This was our reality for most of human history. The Neanderthals lived in Europe and Western Asia. They were shorter than us, stockier, built for the cold. Their brains were actually bigger than ours. They had massive brow ridges, barrel chests, bones thick enough to survive impacts that would shatter ours. They weren't dumb cavemen. That's a myth we need to kill right now. Neanderthals buried their dead. They made jewelry. They created art. Cave paintings in Spain that we thought were ours. Some of them were Neanderthal, made 65,000 years ago, before modern. Humans even reached Europe. They cared for their sick and elderly. Archaeologists found a Neanderthal skeleton in Iraq. The man had been severely disabled, multiple injuries. He couldn't hunt, couldn't gather. Yet he lived to old age. Someone fed him, protected him. kept him alive for years. That's compassion. That's humanity. But they were different from us in ways we're still figuring out. Their tools stayed the same for hundreds of thousands of years. They made beautiful hand axes, perfect symmetry. But they didn't innovate much. They found what worked and stuck with it. We couldn't do that. We changed constantly. New tools, new techniques, new ideas every few thousand years. Maybe that restlessness saved us. Or maybe it just made us different. In Asia, there were the Denisovans. We barely know anything about them. A finger bone, some teeth, a jaw. That's almost all we've found. But their DNA tells us they were real. They were widespread. And they were successful. They lived in Siberia, in Tibet. Maybe as far south as Indonesia. They adapted to high altitudes. Their genes helped them breathe thin air. Some Tibetan people today carry those Denisovan genes. The altitude doesn't bother them the way it bothers the rest of us. The Denisovans gave them that gift. On an island in Indonesia, there were the hobbits, Homo floresiensis. They stood 3 feet tall, tiny humans on a tiny island. Their brains were the size of grapefruits. But they made tools. They hunted. They used fire. They might have survived until 50,000 years ago. That's recent. Really recent. Modern humans might have met them. Imagine that encounter. You're exploring a new island. You see smoke. You approach carefully. And there they are. Humans. But small. So small. Looking back at you with the same curiosity you feel. What happened next? We don't know. But the hobbits disappeared shortly after we arrived. That pattern repeats. Everywhere we went, other human species vanished. The Neanderthals disappeared 40,000 years ago. The Denisovans around the same time. The hobbits, the last remnants of Homo erectus, all gone within a few thousand years of our arrival. Some people think we killed them, outcompeted them, hunted them to extinction. It's possible. We're good at that. But here's what complicates the story. We didn't just kill them. We had sex with them. Your DNA probably contains Neanderthal genes. If your ancestors came from anywhere outside Africa, you're about 2% Neanderthal. That doesn't sound like much. But it's significant. It means our ancestors and Neanderthals didn't just meet. They formed relationships, had children. Those children survived, thrived, passed those genes down. If you have ancestry from Asia or Oceania, you probably have Denisovan DNA too. Up to 5% in some populations. We absorbed them, took their genes, their adaptations, their innovations, and then they disappeared as separate species. Was it violence? Competition? Disease? Interbreeding until they were genetically swamped? Probably all of the above. But it wasn't simple. It wasn't just us versus them. Some Neanderthals and modern humans lived side by side for thousands of years. In the Middle East, they overlapped for 50,000 years. That's a long time to coexist. They must have seen each other, traded maybe, fought sometimes, loved occasionally. The evidence shows both violence and cooperation. Neanderthal sites with modern human tools, modern human sites with Neanderthal techniques, hybrid individuals with features of both species. We were separate but connected, different but similar enough to recognize each other as kin. And then we were alone. By 40,000 years ago, we were the last humans left. The only species in our genus still breathing. Everyone else was gone. That's never happened before in human evolution. For millions of years, multiple human species coexisted. Homo habilis and Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis. Different humans sharing the planet. Now there's just us. Some scientists think that loneliness changed us, made us different. When you're the only ones left, you have to talk to each other, trade with each other, learn from each other. You can't just avoid the weird humans over the hill. They're your only option. Maybe that forced cooperation sparked something. The art, the culture, the explosion of innovation that came right after the other humans disappeared. Or maybe we just got lucky. But I keep thinking about those encounters. Modern humans meeting Neanderthals for the first time. What did they think? Were they scared? Curious? Did they see themselves in those different faces? Some Neanderthal sites show signs of violence, broken bones, weapons. Maybe some meetings went badly, but some show something else. Shared meals, mixed groups, children who were half one species, half another. We're carrying their legacy in our genes. Neanderthal genes help our immune systems, fight off diseases, adapt to new climates. Denisovan genes help some people survive at high altitudes, process oxygen more efficiently. They're not completely gone. They're in us. Part of our story, part of our survival. Every time you fight off a cold, thank your Neanderthal ancestors. Every time you climb a mountain, thank the Denisovans. They gave us tools we still use, but we were the ones who made it, the ones who survived. While they faded away, we spread everywhere, adapted to everything, became the most successful human species ever. Was it our restlessness, our innovation, our ability to cooperate in large groups, our language, our art? Probably all of it. Probably luck too, but we're here and they're not. And that fact shapes everything about us. We're the survivors, the last human standing, the species that outlasted everyone else, that's both amazing and lonely. For 200,000 years we shared the world with other kinds of humans. They were our neighbours, our competitors, sometimes our partners. They were different enough to be other, similar enough to be kin, and now we're alone. The only human species left on a planet that once held many. We carry them with us, in our genes, in our bones, in the tools and techniques we learned from them. They're part of our success story, but we're the ones who survived, against the predators, against the climate, against the other humans who were stronger, tougher, better adapted to the cold. We won, not through strength, not through size, but through something else, something that made us different, something that kept us going when everyone else fell behind. Subscribe if you want to keep meeting here at night. Tell me where you're drifting off from and what time it is. It's strange to think about. Right now, people all over the world are listening to this, closing their eyes, letting these ancient stories carry them towards sleep. We're connected by curiosity, by the need to understand where we came from, by the comfort of voices in the dark. We had the planet to ourselves, right? Wrong. For most of our 300,000 years on Earth, we shared it with other kinds of humans, not just Neanderthals in Europe, not just Denisovans in Asia. There were others, Homo erectus still hanging on in Indonesia, Homo naledi deep in African caves, maybe species we haven't found yet. They were our cousins, close enough that we could interbreed, different enough that we knew they weren't us, and we were competing for the same resources, same hunting grounds, same water sources, same shelters from the cold. When food got scarce, we weren't just competing with lions and hyenas. We were competing with other humans who wanted exactly what we wanted. Think about what that does to a species. You can't just expand into new territory. Someone's already there. You can't just follow the herds. Other hunters are tracking them too. Every advantage you gain, they might copy. Every innovation you make, they might steal. This wasn't like modern human groups competing with each other. Those are cultural differences, surface variations. We're all the same species underneath. This was different species, different evolutionary paths, different solutions to the same problems. The Neanderthals had 400,000 years of European experience. They knew that landscape, every cave, every seasonal migration route, every plant that stayed edible through winter. They were built for the cold, stocky bodies that conserved heat, massive nasal cavities that warmed freezing air before it hit their lungs. We were the newcomers, tall and skinny, built for African heat. When modern humans first pushed into Europe around 50,000 years ago, we were walking into someone else's home. The Neanderthals had every advantage: better adapted bodies, deeper knowledge, established territories. So why did we win? That's the question that haunts anthropology, because we did win by 40,000 years. Ago, Neanderthals were declining. By 30,000 years ago, they were gone. Same with the Denisovans. Same with every other human species. Only we remained. The easy answer is that we were smarter, but the evidence doesn't support that. Neanderthal brains were bigger than ours. They made tools, created art, buried their dead with flowers and ochre. They weren't dumb. Maybe it was language. Maybe we could communicate in ways they couldn't, but we don't know that. Neanderthals had the FOXP2 gene, the same one linked to speech in modern humans. They had the throat anatomy for complex sounds. They might have talked just fine. Maybe it was social organisation. Some researchers think modern humans lived in larger groups. More people means more ideas, more specialists, more hands to share the work. But group size leaves subtle traces in the archaeological record. We're guessing based on hearth patterns and settlement layouts. It's not conclusive. Here's another theory. We were more aggressive, not smarter, not better adapted, just more willing to fight for resources, more willing to push into territories that weren't ours, more willing to take risks. There's some evidence for this. When modern humans and Neanderthals overlapped in Europe, violence increased. Neanderthal remains show more injuries, signs of conflict. We might have simply outcompeted them through sheer aggression. Or maybe it was something smaller, something we barely notice. Modern humans threw spears differently. We had a more efficient throwing motion, longer range, better accuracy. That's a tiny advantage. But in hunting, tiny advantages compound. Kill one more animal per week than your competitors. Over generations, that adds up. Your population grows slightly faster. Theirs shrinks slightly. Give it 10,000 years. They're gone. Or maybe it was dogs. Yeah, dogs. The earliest evidence of dog domestication goes back about 40,000 years, right when modern humans were spreading across Europe, right when Neanderthals were declining. Dogs are force multipliers. They track prey we'd never find, alert us to danger we'd never see, carry loads we couldn't manage, provide warmth on freezing nights. Neanderthals never domesticated dogs, or if they did, we haven't found evidence of it. That's a massive advantage. Humans with dogs versus humans without. It's not even close. But here's what really happened. Probably. We didn't outcompete them in one dramatic way. We had lots of small advantages. Slightly better tools, slightly larger groups, slightly more innovation. Dogs, better throwing technique, more aggression, more adaptability. Each advantage was minor, but together they tipped the balance. And there's one more factor, one we don't like to talk about. We absorbed them. Modern humans didn't just replace Neanderthals. We interbred with them. If you're of European or Asian descent, about 2% of your DNA is Neanderthal. Some people have up to 4%. We didn't wipe them out. We merged with them, slowly, over thousands of years. The Neanderthal population was already small, already fragmented. When modern humans arrived, some groups fought, some avoided each other, and some mixed. Every time a modern human and a Neanderthal had children together, that was one less pure Neanderthal in the next generation. Do that for 10,000 years. The Neanderthal population doesn't disappear. It dissolves into ours. Same with the Denisovans. People in Melanesia and Australia have Denisovan DNA. up to 5% in some populations. Those genes are still here, still functional. Some of them help with high-altitude adaptation, some boost immune response. We didn't destroy our cousins, we absorbed them. But that raises an uncomfortable question. If we merged with them, if we took their genes, if we learned from them, were we really better? Or were we just more numerous? Maybe the answer is simpler than we want it to be. Maybe we won because we got lucky with geography. Africa is huge, connected to Europe and Asia by land bridges. When climate shifted, we could move, find new territories. Our population stayed large and connected. Neanderthals were stuck in Europe, isolated by ice sheets. When their population crashed during cold periods, they couldn't get reinforcements from elsewhere. We had demographic momentum. They didn't. That's not a satisfying answer. We want to believe we won because we were special, because we had some quality that made us superior. But evolution doesn't care about satisfying narratives. Sometimes you win because you have more people, because your population can absorb losses that would destroy a smaller group, because you can afford to fail and try again. The Neanderthals couldn't afford to fail. Every setback was catastrophic. Every cold period pushed them closer to extinction. We could fail repeatedly and still recover. And we did fail. Repeatedly. That bottleneck at Toba almost killed us. Other climate disasters probably did the same. But we had enough people, spread across enough territory, that some groups always survived. The other human species didn't have that buffer. By 30,000 years ago, we were alone. The only human species left on Earth. That loneliness is strange when you think about it. For 270,000 years, we shared the world with cousins who were almost like us. Different, but recognizable. Human, but not quite. Now they're gone, and we carry pieces of them in our genes. Echoes of species that no longer exist. Every time you look at someone with red hair, you're seeing a Neanderthal gene. Every time someone adapts easily to high altitude, that might be Denisovan DNA at work. They're not extinct. Not entirely. They're woven into us, part of the genetic tapestry that makes modern humans what we are. But as distinct species, as separate branches of the human family tree, they're gone. We outcompeted them, absorbed them, replaced them, and we moved on, spread across the planet, filled every niche they once occupied. The competition was over. We won. But winning meant losing something too, the knowledge that we weren't alone, that other kinds of minds existed, other ways of being human. Now there's just us, one species, one way of thinking, one solution to the problem of existence, and we're still here, still carrying their genes, still using the tools and techniques we learned from them, still wondering what it was like when the world held many kinds of human. When we weren't the only ones asking questions in the dark, Mount Toba erupted. The sky went dark, temperatures dropped 15 degrees, 6 years of volcanic winter. But the volcano wasn't the only threat. Here's what the evidence shows. The climate was already unstable before Toba. Africa was cycling through extreme swings, wet periods, dry periods, each one lasting thousands of years. Lake levels tell the story. Sediment cores from East African lakes show massive fluctuations. Deep water, shallow water. Sometimes the lakes dried up completely. When the lakes disappeared, everything else followed. Animals migrated away, plants died, water sources vanished. Humans had to move or die. Genetic studies back this up. Our DNA shows multiple population crashes, not just Toba. Several events between 200,000 and 70,000 years ago, where human numbers dropped dangerously low. We almost went extinct, multiple times. Each crash left a signature. Reduced genetic diversity. Bottlenecks where only a few thousand people survived. then slow recovery over thousands of years. This wasn't one catastrophe. It was a series of them, and each time we barely made it through. The archaeological record shows something interesting. During these crisis periods, human sites become sparse, fewer tools, fewer camps, long gaps where we find almost nothing. Then suddenly, evidence reappears. New sites, new tools, signs of recovery. But here's the strange part. The tools that reappear are often different from what came before. New techniques, new designs, like the knowledge was lost and had to be reinvented. That's what near extinction does. It erases cultural memory. Imagine your group drops to 50 people, maybe 100. You're scattered across a massive landscape, isolated, struggling to survive. The old ways get forgotten. The specialist knowledge disappears. Nobody remembers how to make the best tools because everyone's too busy finding food. When populations recover, they start fresh, reinvent, figure things out again. This happened over and over during those 200,000 years. So what actually saved us during these crashes? The coast. Probably. There's a theory called the coastal migration model. When inland areas became uninhabitable, humans moved to shorelines. The coast provided stable resources: shellfish, fish, seaweed, marine mammals. These foods don't disappear when the climate shifts. Lakes dry up, herds migrate, but the ocean stays. Archaeological sites along the South African coast show continuous human occupation during periods when inland sites are empty. These coastal populations kept going when inland groups collapsed. They ate shellfish, lots of shellfish. The middens are massive, layers of shell stretching back 100,000 years. But shellfish aren't just food, they're brain food. The human brain needs specific nutrients: omega-3 fatty acids, iodine, DHA. These nutrients are crucial for brain development, for maintaining cognitive function. You know where you find these nutrients in high concentrations? Seafood. Some researchers think the coastal diet literally made us smarter, not through evolution, through nutrition. Better fed brains work better, think clearer, solve problems faster. The groups that survived might have been the ones eating fish, but there's another factor, one that's harder to measure: social networks. When populations crash, isolation kills. A group of 50 people can't survive. Long term, inbreeding becomes a problem. One bad winter wipes everyone out, no backup, no reinforcements. But if those 50 people maintain contact with other groups, share resources, trade tools, exchange members, they have a chance. The evidence suggests this happened. Even during crisis periods, we find similar tools across wide geographic areas. That means contact, communication, trade networks that kept functioning despite low population numbers. Humans who maintained these connections survived. Isolated groups didn't. Think about what that required. You're struggling to feed your own family. Resources are scarce. Every day is a fight for survival, but you still travel 3 days to trade with another group, still share information about water sources, still maintain relationships with people you rarely see. That's not instinct. That's culture. That's planning. That's understanding that long-term survival requires cooperation beyond your immediate group. The groups that understood this made it through. The ones that didn't vanished. There's another piece of evidence, one that surprised researchers. Ochre use increases during crisis periods. Ochre is red pigment, ground from iron-rich rocks. Humans have used it for at least 300,000 years. We find it at sites across Africa. But during population bottlenecks, ochre use spikes. More processing sites, more grinding stones, more evidence of ochre being transported long distances. Why? Nobody knows for certain, but ochre has symbolic value. It's used in rituals, body decoration, marking important objects. Maybe during crisis periods, symbolic behavior became more important. Groups needed ways to maintain identity, mark boundaries, signal alliances, or maybe ochre had practical uses we don't fully understand. Insect repellent, hide processing, medicine. Either way, humans in crisis used more of it. That's significant. It means even when survival was uncertain, we invested energy in something beyond immediate needs. We cared about meaning, identity, connection. That might be what saved us. Not bigger brains, not better tools, but the ability to create meaning in the darkness, to maintain culture when everything else was falling apart. The Toba eruption hit around 74,000 years ago. The genetic evidence shows our population crashed to maybe 10,000 people, possibly fewer. But here's what's remarkable. Within 10,000 years, humans had spread across Asia. By 60,000 years ago, we were in Australia. By 45,000 years ago, we'd reached Europe. We didn't just survive the catastrophe. We exploded out of Africa immediately after. That seems backwards. You'd expect a traumatized population to recover slowly, stay put, rebuild cautiously. Instead, we scattered across the planet. Why? Maybe the survivors were selected for risk-taking. The groups that stayed put during the volcanic winter died. The ones that moved, that took chances, that explored new territories survived. So the humans who emerged from the bottleneck were the descendants of risk-takers. People wired to move, to explore, to try new things even when it's dangerous. That trait then drove the global expansion. We couldn't help ourselves. We had to see what was over the next ridge, across the next ocean. Or maybe the crisis taught us something, showed us that staying in one place was dangerous. That survival meant mobility, flexibility, the willingness to abandon everything and move. Either way, the population that emerged from these catastrophes was different from what came before. Tougher, more adaptable, more connected, and more willing to take insane risks. Crossing the Red Sea into Arabia, sailing to Australia across 100 kilometers of open ocean, walking into the frozen north during an ice age. These aren't the actions of a cautious species. These are the actions of people who learned that the biggest risk is standing still. The evidence shows something else. Tool technology accelerates after these crisis periods. Not just new tools, entirely new categories of tools. Projectile points appear, bone tools, microliths, composite tools made from multiple materials, each innovation more complex than the last. Crisis drove innovation, had to. The old ways weren't working. Groups that stuck with traditional methods died. Groups that experimented, that tried new approaches, survived. Over time, this created a culture of innovation, a mindset where change was normal, expected, necessary. That mindset might be our most important adaptation, not physical, not genetic, cultural. The ability to look at a problem and think, what if we tried something different? Most species can't do that. They're locked into instinctive behaviors. When conditions change, they adapt through evolution, slowly, over thousands of generations. We adapted through culture, fast, within a single generation. That's why we survived when others didn't. When the Neanderthals faced crisis, they responded with the tools and techniques they'd always used. When we faced crisis, we invented new solutions. Neither approach is better in stable conditions, but when the world is ending, flexibility wins. The genetic evidence shows one more thing. All humans alive today share a common maternal ancestor from around 150,000 years ago, mitochondrial Eve. She wasn't the only woman alive. She wasn't special, but she's the only one whose maternal line survived unbroken to the present. Every other maternal line from that time went extinct, died out during one of those population crashes, lost to climate, disease, bad luck. But her line kept going. Through every catastrophe, every bottleneck, every near-extinction event, were all her descendants, carrying her mitochondrial DNA, her legacy written in every cell of our bodies. That's both humbling and terrifying. We exist because one woman's daughter survived, one family line that didn't break. All the other lines, all the other families from 150,000 years ago are gone. Their stories ended. Their genes disappeared. We're the exception, the lucky ones, the descendants of survivors, and we carry their resilience, their adaptability, their refusal to give up even when everything looked hopeless. That's what those 200,000 years taught us. How to survive the impossible, how to keep going when the world is ending, how to find meaning in the darkness. Those lessons are still in us, still shaping how we respond to crisis, still driving us to explore, adapt, innovate. We're not just the descendants of survivors, we're the product of catastrophe, forged by crisis, shaped by near extinction, and somehow, impossibly, we're still here. Something changed around 70,000 years ago. Not just survival, something deeper. The humans who crawled out of the Toba bottleneck were different. Not physically. Their bones looked the same. Their brains were the same size, but their minds had shifted. This is where it gets strange. For 190,000 years, modern humans left almost nothing behind. Basic tools, campsites, signs of survival. Then suddenly, around 70,000 years ago, everything explodes. Art appears, music, jewellery, complex weapons, elaborate burials, trade networks spanning hundreds of miles, all at once, like someone flipped a switch. Archaeologists call this the cognitive revolution, the moment humans became truly human, when we started thinking the way we think now. But here's the problem. Our brains didn't change. The fossil record is clear. Human brains reached modern size 300,000 years ago. The hardware was ready. So what took so long? Why did we spend 190,000 years with modern brains but no modern behaviour? What was missing? Nobody knows, and that drives scientists crazy. There are theories, lots of them, none completely satisfying. One idea is language. Maybe we could make sounds before, but true language developed around 70,000 years ago. The kind of language that lets you explain abstract concepts, tell stories, share ideas that don't exist in the physical world. Language changes everything. Without it, you can teach someone to make a tool by showing them. With it, you can explain why the tool works, the principle behind it, how to adapt it for different situations. You can share knowledge that isn't obvious, pass down wisdom, build on what previous generations learned. But here's the catch. We don't know when language developed. It doesn't fossilize. We can't dig up ancient words. Some scientists think language is much older, maybe 200,000 years, maybe more. The anatomy was there. Descended larynx, tongue control, brain regions for speech. If language is older, then something else caused the revolution. Another theory focuses on social networks. Maybe around 70,000 years ago, human groups started connecting differently. Larger networks, more trade, more sharing of ideas. When you're isolated, innovation dies. You figure something out, but when you die, it dies. With you. Your kids might remember some of it. But details get lost. When groups connect, ideas spread. Someone in one area invents a better spear point. Within a generation, groups 500 miles away are using it, improving it, adding their own innovations. This creates a ratchet effect. Knowledge builds. each generation adds to what came before instead of starting over. The archaeological evidence supports this. After 70,000 years ago, we see similar tools across vast distances. Ochre from specific sources traded hundreds of miles. Shell beads from the coast found far inland. People were moving, trading, talking, sharing. But why did this start then? What changed? Maybe nothing changed. Maybe it was just random. Population density finally reached a critical threshold. Enough people and enough contact that ideas could spread and stick. Or maybe the crisis itself triggered it. The Toba eruption, the population crash, the desperate struggle to survive. When you're facing extinction, you try anything. Experiment. Take risks. The groups that survived were the ones willing to innovate, and once that mindset took hold, it never stopped. Innovation became normal, expected, part of who we were. There's another theory, one that's harder to test. Maybe the change was neurological, not brain size, not anatomy. Something subtle in how neurons connected. Think about autism spectrum disorders. People with autism often have normal or above average intelligence, but they process information differently. Social cues that seem obvious to most people aren't obvious to them. What if early humans had something similar? The hardware was there. The processing was different. Maybe around 70,000 years ago, a mutation spread. Something that changed how we connect ideas, how we see patterns, how we imagine things that don't exist. The ability to think symbolically. To look at red ochre and see not just a rock, but the colour of blood, of life, of power. To see a shell and imagine it as decoration, as status, as identity. This kind of thinking doesn't leave fossils, but it changes everything. With symbolic thought, you can create meaning, tell stories, build myths, develop religion. Imagine futures that don't exist yet and work toward them. You can look at a piece of ivory and see a flute, carve it, create music, not because music helps you survive, because music means something. The earliest known musical instruments date to around 40,000 years ago. Bone flutes, carved from vulture wing bones. They took hours to make, required precision, planning. Someone sat down and spent days creating something that had no practical purpose. Just beauty, just sound, just meaning. That's the cognitive revolution. The moment we started caring about things beyond survival. But here's what's really strange. Neanderthals never did this. Not really. They had bigger brains than us. They'd been around longer. They were perfectly intelligent. But they didn't make art. Didn't make music. Didn't create elaborate burials or jewellery or any of the symbolic stuff we went crazy for. A few Neanderthal sites show hints of symbolic behaviour. Ochre use, a few shell beads, but it's rare, limited. Nothing like what modern humans were doing. Why? Maybe they thought differently. Maybe symbolic thought isn't automatic. Maybe it requires specific neural wiring that they didn't have. Or maybe they just didn't need it. Their culture worked. Their way of thinking kept them alive for 400,000 years. Why change? We changed because we had to, or because we couldn't help ourselves, or because random mutation gave us brains that couldn't stop making meaning out of everything. Either way, the change made us unstoppable. After 70,000 years ago, humans spread across the world, not slowly, fast. Within 30,000 years, we'd reached every continent except Antarctica. We walked into environments we'd never seen, figured them out, adapted, survived. The Neanderthals couldn't do that. They stayed in Europe and Western Asia, the environments they knew. When we showed up, they couldn't compete. Not because we were smarter, because we were more flexible, more creative, more willing to try crazy things. We crossed oceans on rafts, walked into frozen tundra, survived in deserts where nothing grows. Each time we invented new solutions, new tools, new techniques, new ways of organizing society. The cognitive revolution gave us that, the ability to imagine solutions that don't exist yet. To think, what if we tried this and actually try it? Most attempts failed, but some worked, and the ones that worked spread. This is why modern humans won. Not bigger brains, not better bodies, better culture, better ability to innovate and share innovations. The Neanderthals were stuck with the wisdom of their ancestors. We could invent new wisdom whenever we needed it. There's something else. After the cognitive revolution, humans started burying their dead differently, not just putting bodies in the ground, creating elaborate graves, bodies arranged carefully, covered with ochre, surrounded by tools, jewellery, food, like they were preparing for a journey. This suggests belief in an afterlife, the idea that death isn't the end, that something continues. You can't prove an afterlife exists, can't touch it, can't see it. But humans around 70,000 years ago started believing in it anyway. That symbolic thought, creating entire worlds in your mind, worlds that might not exist, then acting as if they do. Religion probably started here, not organized religion, something simpler. The feeling that there's more to existence than what you can see. That meaning exists beyond survival. Once you can imagine invisible worlds, you can imagine invisible forces, spirits, gods, ancestors watching from beyond. These beliefs change behavior, make you treat the dead with respect, follow rules even when nobody's watching, cooperate with strangers because you share the same invisible world. Maybe that's what the cognitive revolution really was, the moment we started living in imagined realities, shared fictions that bound us together. Money is an imagined reality. It's just paper. But we all agree it has value. That shared fiction lets us cooperate with millions of strangers, laws, nations, human rights, all imagined realities. They don't exist in nature, but they exist in our minds, and because we all believe in them, they shape the world. This ability appeared around 70,000 years ago, and it changed everything. We're still living in the cognitive revolution, still creating shared fictions, still imagining realities and making them real through collective belief. Every human alive today carries this ability. We can't turn it off. We see patterns everywhere, create meaning constantly, imagine futures and work toward them. Is why we tell stories, build cathedrals, write symphonies, send rockets to Mars. None of that helps us survive. Not directly. But we can't help ourselves. We need meaning, need beauty, need to create things that matter beyond mere survival. That need started 70,000 years ago, in the aftermath of catastrophe, when a few thousand humans looked at the darkness and decided it meant something. We've been making meaning ever since, finding patterns in chaos, creating beauty from nothing, imagining better worlds and building them. That's what separates us, not from other animals, from our own ancestors. The humans before the revolution survived. We create, and we're about to take that creativity and spread it across the entire planet. So, let's zoom in on what happened after that mental spark. Once our ancestors had these new ways of thinking, they didn't just sit around in Africa, they started moving. Not all at once, not in a giant wave, but step by step. One group at a time, over thousands of years. This moment, when humans left Africa for the wider world, is one of the biggest turning points in our story. Imagine the world map, Africa is the starting point. For almost all of human history, every single person on Earth lived there. Then something shifted. People started exploring. They left behind the places their ancestors had known for hundreds of generations. Nobody knows exactly why. Maybe the land dried up. Maybe there were too many people for the food supply. Maybe they were just curious. Whatever the reason, small groups began to walk north and east, following rivers, coastlines, and animals. The evidence for these journeys is scattered, but it's real. In Israel, there are stone tools and bones from humans who looked like us, dated to about 120,000 years ago. That's old, much older than most people think for the first humans outside Africa. But these early trips didn't last. Climate changes forced people back south. It wasn't until around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago that one group finally made it out for good. This group would become the ancestors of everyone living outside Africa today. Archaeologists find clues about these travellers in the most unlikely places. For example, in southern Arabia, there are ancient campsites with stone tools matched to African styles. Some are 100,000 years old. In India, there's a layer of ash from the Toba eruption, and right above it, archaeologists found human tools. That means people were there during the worst disaster in human history and survived. In Southeast Asia, bones and tools show up between 60,000 and 50,000 years ago. In Australia, there's evidence humans arrived at least 50,000 years ago, maybe earlier. That's a huge journey. To get there, people had to cross the ocean, not just a river or a lake, real sea. Even when water levels were lower than today, the shortest gap was about 60 miles. No land in sight, no boats have survived, but people clearly made the crossing. They must have built rafts or canoes. They probably used simple tools, maybe bundles of logs tied together. But the fact remains, they did it. And here's something wild. Australia was never connected to Asia by land, even during the Ice Age. So these early humans were the world's first sailors. They crossed open water without maps, compasses, or any clue what was on the other side. They brought tools, fire, and even dogs. Archaeologists have found ancient campsites and stone tools all over Australia. Some are more than 45,000 years old. There are even cave paintings showing giant animals, megafauna like marsupial lions and giant kangaroos. These animals disappeared soon after humans arrived. Maybe people hunted them. Maybe humans set fires that changed the landscape. Either way, their journey changed everything. But let's not forget Europe. For a long time it was Neanderthal territory. Cold, harsh, and dangerous. Our ancestors didn't arrive in large numbers until about 45,000 years ago. When they did, it was another leap. The climate was much colder than Africa. There were glaciers, snow, and animals like mammoths and woolly rhinos. The people who made it to Europe brought new tools, blades, bone needles, spear throwers. They wore clothing stitched together with thread. They built shelters from animal skins and mammoth bones. They decorated caves with paintings, handprints, animals, abstract shapes. These are some of the oldest works of art in the world. You can still see them today in places like France and Spain. The colours are made from ochre, charcoal, and other minerals. Some images are more than 30,000 years old. They show horses, bison, deer, and strange symbols. Some caves have hundreds of paintings. It's like a prehistoric art gallery. The movement out of Africa didn't happen in a straight line. It was more like a web spreading out in all directions. People reached China by about 40,000 years ago. They crossed into Siberia and the Russian Far East. Around 20,000 years ago, groups made it across the frozen land bridge that connected Siberia to Alaska. This land bridge called Beringia only existed because so much water was locked up in ice. The sea level was lower, exposing a wide stretch of land. Animals walked across it. So did humans. Once people made it into the Americas, they kept going. Archaeologists used to think humans first arrived in North America about 13,000 years ago, following big animals like mammoths south. But new discoveries have pushed that date back. There are sites in Chile, in South America, that are at least 15,000 years old. Some evidence even points to people in North America 20,000 years ago. That means humans spread from Alaska to the southern tip of South America in just a few thousand years. That's fast, especially with Stone Age technology. So how do we know all this? What evidence do we have? It's a mix of things: bones, tools, DNA, and even ancient footprints. Let's start with DNA. Every person today carries bits of genetic information from those early travellers. Scientists can compare the DNA of people from different parts of the world. They see patterns that match the spread of humans out of Africa. For example, most people outside Africa share tiny bits of DNA with Neanderthals. That's proof our ancestors met and had children with them. In Asia, some people have DNA from another group, the Denisovans. Genetic studies show that everyone whose ancestors left Africa shares a common branch of the family tree. The split happened about 60,000 to 70,000 years ago. That fits with the archaeological evidence. Tools are another big clue. Stone tools don't rot or burn up. They last for tens of thousands of years. By looking at the style of these tools, archaeologists can trace the movement of people. In Africa, the most common tools were simple flakes and scrapers. As people left, they started making more advanced blades, points, and even tiny tools called microliths. These small blades could be glued into wooden handles to make complex weapons, arrows, harpoons, sickles. The same styles show up across huge distances. That means ideas, and maybe the people themselves, were moving fast. Bones tell a similar story. Human skeletons found in Israel, Greece and China show a spread out of Africa. Skulls from these sites look like modern humans. In Europe, the oldest bones are about 45,000 years old. They tell us that people adapted quickly to new environments. Body shapes changed. In cold places, people got stockier. In hot places, they stayed lean. These changes happened fast, sometimes in just a few thousand years. Jewellery and art also help us track the spread. Shell beads found in North Africa match beads found far away in the Middle East. They're the same style, made in the same way. Some caves in Europe and Indonesia both have handprint stencils, people blowing paint over their hands to leave a mark. The same idea, thousands of miles apart. It's a sign of connected thinking. Maybe these ideas spread as people moved, or maybe different groups started doing similar things because their minds worked in similar ways. Either way, the results are stunning. Sometimes the evidence is even more direct. In 2021, archaeologists found ancient footprints in White Sands, New Mexico. They're more than 20,000 years old. You can see the prints of children, teenagers, adults. They walked along a muddy lake shore, leaving tracks that lasted for thousands of generations. This is proof that people were in North America much earlier than anyone thought. But not every journey was easy. Moving into new lands meant facing new dangers, different animals, strange plants, harsh weather. People had to learn how to hunt new prey. In Australia, that meant giant lizards and marsupial lions. In Europe, it was mammoths and cave bears. In Siberia, people hunted reindeer and woolly rhinos. In the Americas, they found camels, horses, and ground sloths. Some of these animals went extinct soon after humans arrived. Maybe it was hunting, maybe climate change, maybe both. There's something else. As people moved, they carried their culture with them. tools, art, language, beliefs. But they also adapted. In the Arctic, people invented new clothes, parkas, boots, mittens. They built houses from snow and ice. In deserts, they learned how to find water and shelter from the sun. Along coasts, they fished and gathered shellfish. In forests, they tracked deer and wild pigs. Every new land meant new challenges and new solutions. One thing stands out: the speed of this expansion. From the time humans left Africa for good, it only took about 20,000 years to reach the far corners of the world. That might sound slow, but in evolutionary terms it's lightning fast. Other animals take millions of years to spread that far. Humans did it in a blink. And it wasn't just the strong or the lucky who made it. It was whole families, whole communities. Old people, children, pregnant women, everyone moved, together, carrying their knowledge and traditions. So, what drove this wave of migration? Was it curiosity, hunger, fear? Maybe all of those. But the evidence shows that people were always pushing into the unknown. They followed rivers, coastlines, and animal herds. Sometimes they probably got lost. Sometimes they found new lands by accident. But once they settled somewhere, they made it home. They learned the plants, the weather, the animals. They made new kinds of tools from local materials. They painted new stories on cave walls. They built shelters that worked for their climate. Let's talk about how these journeys changed us. When people spread out, they started living in very different environments. Some lived in rainforests, others in deserts, mountains, or tundra. This pushed humans to adapt in ways no other species ever had. Skin color changed depending on sunlight. Eye and hair color shifted. Body shapes adjusted to climate. Even resistance to certain diseases changed. All of this happened in a few thousand generations. It's why people look different in different parts of the world. But underneath, we're all incredibly similar. The genetic differences between any two humans are tiny compared to what we share. There's another interesting pattern. Wherever people went, they took fire with them. Fire was as important as food or water. It kept away predators, cooked food, and warmed cold nights. It could even help shape the land. In Australia, early humans used fire to manage grasslands. They burned patches to help new plants grow, which attracted animals. In the Americas, people set controlled fires to clear forests and help hunting. Fire wasn't just a tool. It was part of our survival strategy. Now let's look at the social side. The groups that left Africa probably weren't huge. Maybe 100 to 500 people at a time, sometimes even less. As they travelled, some split off, forming new bands. Over time, these small groups became the ancestors of every culture on Earth. Each journey was a gamble. There were times when groups died out. Archaeologists find traces of settlements that didn't last. But the groups that survived kept moving, learning and adapting. They passed down their stories and skills. Sometimes they met other humans, like Neanderthals or Denisovans. Sometimes they fought. Sometimes they mixed. That mixing left marks in our DNA that you can see today in people from Europe and Asia. Let's pause for a second. Imagine walking out of the only world you've ever known. No map, no guarantee there's anything ahead. The courage that took is hard to imagine. But somehow it became normal. Each new land was a blank canvas. People filled it with their own culture, their own dreams. The world became a patchwork of human groups, each with their own language, art, tools, and beliefs. Food was always at the centre of this. In Africa, people hunted antelope and gathered roots. In Europe, it was reindeer and mammoths. In Asia, wild horses and fish. In the Americas, bison and wild plants. People learned to use everything: meat, bones, skins, even sinew for sewing. Nothing was wasted. In some places, people invented new ways of getting food. In Japan, ancient people made pottery 16,000 years ago to cook shellfish and plants. In the Middle East, people started collecting wild grains. This would eventually lead to farming, but that's still far in the future. Shelter was another big change. In warm places, a simple windbreak was enough. In the cold north, people built homes from bones, wood, and animal skins. In the Arctic, they invented the igloo, a house made of snow. In forests, they made huts from branches and leaves. These shelters weren't just for warmth. They were homes, places to share stories, make tools, raise children. So, what does all this mean? The spread of humans across the world is more than just a travel story. It's the story of adaptation, invention, and survival. It's proof that humans are problem solvers. We never stopped moving, never stopped learning. Every new challenge was met with a new idea. Sometimes those ideas failed, but enough of them work to keep us going. One last thing. The evidence isn't perfect. Sometimes whole chapters are missing. Bones rot. Tools get buried. Art fades. But every year, archaeologists find more clues. A footprint here, a bone there, a piece of jewellery made from a shell that came from hundreds of miles away. Each find fills in another piece of the puzzle. What I love about this mystery is that it's still going. Every person on Earth today is part of the same journey. We're all connected by that first leap out of Africa. Our stories are different, but our roots are the same. The courage, creativity, and stubborn hope that carried our ancestors forward, it's still in us. Now, as we look at how humans conquered new lands, remember, they did this during the Ice Age. The world was colder, harsher, and more dangerous than today. And yet, they survived. They adapted. They changed the world just by being in it. But the Ice Age wasn't finished testing them. The next chapter is about how those challenges pushed humans even further. The Ice Age is almost like a character in our story, a giant, silent force shaping everything humans did. It wasn't just cold, it was relentless. Imagine a world where winter never really ends. Glaciers bigger than mountains crawl across half the planet. In some places, ice is a mile thick. In others, it's so dry and windy that trees can't survive. This is the world our ancestors faced. It sounds impossible, but the evidence is everywhere. Let's start with what the Ice Age actually looked like. The last one peaked around 20,000 years ago, but the cold cycles kept coming and going for much longer. There were times when glaciers reached all the way to what's now New York, London, and Berlin. The landscape was different everywhere. Northern Europe and Canada were buried under ice. Siberia was a frozen grassland. Africa and Asia had deserts where today there are forests. Even the ocean was different. So much water was trapped in ice that sea levels dropped by over 300 feet. Whole coastlines vanished. Land bridges appeared, connecting places now separated by oceans. This wasn't a short event. The Ice Age lasted tens of thousands of years. That's hundreds of generations living with freezing temperatures, wild swings between bitter cold and brief, chilly summers. Some parts of the world were almost unlivable. And yet, humans made it work. How do we know what the Ice Age was like? It's all in the clues left behind. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica are like time machines. Each layer of ice traps tiny bubbles of air from the past. Scientists drill deep into the ice, pulling out long cylinders. By looking at the chemicals and trapped gases, they can tell what the atmosphere was like each year. These records show just how quickly the climate could change. Some shifts happened in only a decade. Frozen ground, called permafrost, also holds secrets. In Siberia, scientists dig up the bones of mammoths, woolly rhinos, and even ancient humans. Sometimes they find hair, skin, or even stomach contents, frozen for thousands of years. It's not just bones, though. In caves across Europe and Asia, archaeologists discovered fire pits, stone tools, and the remains of ancient meals. Some caves have layers of ash and charcoal showing how often people return to the same spot, probably for shelter or hunting. Now, picture what living through this really meant. It wasn't just cold, it was unpredictable. One year might be slightly warmer. The next, storms could bury everything in snow. Lakes would freeze solid. Herds of animals would vanish. Sometimes food was everywhere. Sometimes it was gone. People had to move constantly, following the herds, searching for anything edible. Staying in one place was a risk, but moving was dangerous too. There were rivers swollen with meltwater, cliffs hidden by snow, and predators waiting in the dark. What's wild is how many tools humans invented just to survive these conditions. In the far north, people made needles from bone, thin, strong, sharp. With these, they stitched together animal skins to make warm clothing, boots, and gloves. Without these clothes, you'd freeze in hours. In Europe, archaeologists found the remains of shelters built from mammoth bones and skins. These were not just piles of bones. Some were shaped into circles covered with hides, with fireplaces in the middle. In Ukraine and Russia, whole villages were built this way. People even decorated the bones with carvings and ochre. Imagine living inside a house made from the skeleton of a giant animal. Hunting was another huge challenge. The animals were enormous and dangerous. Mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer with antlers wider than a car, and even cave lions. People needed new weapons. This is when you start seeing stone blades shaped into long, thin points, perfect for piercing thick hides. In France and Spain, archaeologists found spear throwers. These are simple tools but powerful. A carved stick with a hook at one end, used to launch a spear much farther and harder than by hand. This changed hunting forever. You could stand farther from the animal and still hit your target. But hunting wasn't the only way to survive. People learned to fish under the ice. They made hooks from bone and nets from plant fibers. In some sites you find tiny barbed points, evidence of harpoons used to catch fish and even seals. Along the coasts people collected shellfish, seaweed, and bird eggs. Wherever there was food, humans found a way to get it. Fire was more than just comfort, it was survival. In the Ice Age world, fire meant life. It cooked food, which made it easier to digest and safer to eat. It kept away predators, cave lions, wolves, hyenas. It also let people make better tools. By heating stones, they could shape them more easily for sharp blades. Firelight was probably the first theatre. People gathered around, telling stories, singing, and making plans. Let's talk about food shortages. There were times when hunting failed. When that happened, people had to get creative. Some groups used grinding stones to crush seeds and nuts. In caves in Israel, archaeologists found the remains of wild barley, ground into flour and baked into simple bread. In Siberia, people boiled bones to get every last bit of fat and protein. Nothing went to waste. Even the marrow inside bones was precious. The Ice Age world was always shifting. Sometimes the glaciers melted back, leaving new land open for plants and animals. Sometimes the ice surged forward, burying everything. Fossil pollen trapped in mud shows these swings. Scientists look at layers in lakes and bogs. Each layer holds grains of pollen from the plants growing nearby. The types change. Quickly, trees, then grasses, then back to trees. This tells us that the world could flip from forest to tundra and back in only a few centuries, and then there's migration. The Ice Age forced people to move, sometimes slowly, sometimes in desperate waves. Fossils and tools show that humans lived at the edge of the glaciers. In Germany, archaeologists found a campsite used by people who hunted reindeer at the very limit of the ice. In southern Europe, Caves became crowded with people escaping the cold north. These places are packed with art, paintings of animals, handprints, and mysterious symbols. Maybe the art was comfort. Maybe it was a prayer for better times. DNA gives us more clues. Scientists study the genes of ancient bones and compare them to people alive today. They can see when populations grew, shrank, or mixed. During the coldest times, groups got smaller and more isolated. Sometimes whole branches of the family tree disappeared. Other times people met and mixed, sharing genes and ideas. When the climate warmed, humans spread out again, filling empty lands. Not every group made it. In some places, the evidence just stops. No more tools, no campsites. Sometimes it's because the land was swallowed by glaciers. Sometimes it's because people died out, unable to find enough food or shelter. But in other places, you see signs of resilience. In France, a cave called Grotte du Rhin held necklaces made from animal teeth, beads, and even carved bones. These aren't just decorations. They're signs of people holding onto culture, even when everything else was falling apart. And then there are the animals. Many of the giant Ice Age creatures died out. Mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats vanished. Why? It's a mystery. Some scientists think humans hunted them too hard. Others say climate change was the real killer. Maybe it was both. What's clear is that these animals were part of daily life. People painted them on cave walls. They used their bones for tools, shelters, and even art. Now, let's look at one of the strangest pieces of evidence: footprints. In places like White Sands, New Mexico, and Happisburgh in England, there are ancient tracks pressed into mud and sand. Some are more than 20,000 years old. You can see the prints of children walking beside adults. Sometimes people walked in single file. Sometimes they wandered. Each print tells a story. Maybe it was a family moving to a new camp. Maybe they were hunting. Maybe they were just exploring a world that seemed endless and empty. Shelter was always a problem. In the far north, people built homes from snow, thick, insulated, and surprisingly warm. In forests, they made huts from branches, leaves, and animal skins. Some groups dug pits in the ground, lining the walls with stones or wood to keep out the cold. In Ukraine, whole villages were built from mammoth bones, arranged in circles with fireplaces at the centre. Living in a house made of bones sounds strange, but it worked. Language and community mattered more than ever. In a world this tough, no one could survive alone. People had to work together, hunting, sharing food, taking care of children and elders. There's evidence of people with broken bones that healed, signs that others cared for them while they recovered. This isn't just survival, it's compassion, it's culture. What about art? The Ice Age is when you see some of the most beautiful and mysterious art ever made. In the caves of France and Spain, there are paintings of horses, bison, lions, and human figures. Some caves have handprints made by blowing paint over hands pressed to the wall. Others have carved figurines, tiny statues of animals or people. In Germany, archaeologists found a figure carved from mammoth ivory. It's a lion with a human body. Nobody knows what it meant, but it shows imagination. In Russia, small clay figures were shaped and fired in ancient hearths. Some look like animals, others like people. Art was everywhere. It wasn't just decoration. It was a way to hold on to meaning when the world outside was harsh and unforgiving. Music appeared too. Flutes made from bird bones and mammoth tusks have been found in caves. Some are over 40,000 years old. Imagine the sound of a flute echoing off cold stone walls while the wind howls outside. Music brought comfort, connection, and maybe even hope. Trade is another sign of human creativity. Even during the hardest times, people exchanged goods. Archaeologists found shells from the Mediterranean in caves hundreds of miles inland. Pieces of obsidian, a volcanic glass used for sharp tools, travelled across whole continents. This means people were meeting, trading, and sharing ideas. Even when food was scarce, they valued beauty and connection. Let's look at rituals. Some burials from the Ice Age are astonishing. In Sungir, Russia, 2 children were buried side by side, covered in thousands of ivory, beads. Each bead took hours to make. Their graves held spears, jewellery, and clothing decorated with fox teeth. These weren't just burials. They were acts of love and memory. Maybe the community believed in an afterlife. Maybe they were honouring their dead with everything they had. How did people deal with the darkness? Winter nights could last for months at high latitudes. With no sun, no warmth, and no growing food, people had to rely on stores, on sharing, and on hope. Firelight songs and stories must have filled those long, frozen nights. Maybe that's when traditions were born, stories passed down, lessons learned, dreams shared. Disease was another challenge. Cold, crowded shelters helped sickness spread. There's evidence of tuberculosis, tooth infections, and even parasites. Yet people survived. Some even lived to old age, their bones showing signs of arthritis and healed injuries. This tells us communities cared for their weak and sick. Survival wasn't just about strength. It was about kindness. Children were everywhere in the record. Their footprints, their teeth, their toys. In some caves, archaeologists found little hand-sized carvings and painted pebbles. Maybe these were toys, maybe teaching tools, maybe gifts. Children learned how to hunt, make tools, and tell stories by watching and copying adults. Childhood was probably short, but it mattered. Let's talk about dogs. The earliest evidence for dogs comes from the Ice Age. Bones found in Germany and Russia show animals halfway between wolves and dogs. People may have tamed them for hunting, warmth, or protection. It's not hard to picture a group of hunters with a few loyal dogs at their side, sharing scraps and warmth around the fire. The Ice Age ended slowly. The world warmed. Glaciers melted and retreated. New land opened up. Forests spread north. Rivers swelled and changed course. Animals migrated, and so did people. Some groups followed the herds. Others settled down in places with rich plants and fish. All those skills learned during the cold, making clothes, building homes, storing food, helped humans thrive in the new world. But the end of the Ice Age brought new problems. Big animals vanished. Old ways of life stopped working. People had to invent new tools, new ways of getting food, new ways of living together. This is where farming, villages, and the first cities began. But that's a story for another time. What I find weirdly comforting is that almost everything we call human, art, music, sharing, hope, was forged in the Ice Age. It was the ultimate test, and we passed. The evidence left behind is a map of resilience. Stone tools, painted caves, footprints in ancient mud, graves filled with beads. Each one is a message from the past. We were here. We faced the impossible, and we found a way through. Now, as we move from survival to the darker side of our story, there's another truth waiting. The Ice Age shaped us, but it also brought out new sides of human nature, some bright, some shadowed. In the next chapter, we'll face what happens when survival turns to conflict, when the world's dangers come not just from nature, but from each other. If you want to understand how tough the world used to be, you have to meet the real Ice Age killers, their megafauna. These weren't just big animals, they were monsters by today's standards. Imagine walking out of your shelter and seeing a hairy elephant as tall as a house, tusks curling like giant scythes. That's a mammoth. Or picture a bear twice the size of any grizzly alive today. Or a saber-toothed cat with teeth as long as your hand. For our ancestors, these weren't stories or myths. They were the neighbours. Let's set the scene. The Ice Age world was crowded with giants. In North America, there were mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, camels, horses, and short-faced bears. In South America, you'd find armoured glyptodons. Think of a car-sized armadillo, and terror birds, flightless predators taller than most people. In Australia, there were giant kangaroos, marsupial lions, and even a tortoise that could crush a watermelon with its jaws. In Europe and Asia, you had woolly rhinos, cave lions, giant deer, and bison bigger than a minivan. These animals dominated the land. They shaped the grasslands and forests. When they moved, the earth shook. When they grazed, they cleared fields. Our ancestors lived in their shadow. They hunted them, avoided them, and sometimes ran from them. But here's where it gets interesting. Almost all the megafauna vanished. Not slowly. In many places they disappeared within just a few thousand years. In some spots, most of the big animals were gone in less than 500 years. This was one of the biggest mass extinctions since the dinosaurs. And it happened right around the time humans arrived in new lands. Let's look at the evidence. In North America, there were at least 35 species of large mammals before people showed up. Mammoths, mastodons, camels, saber-toothed cats, horses, giant sloths, and more. By about 10,000 years ago, almost all of them were gone. Only a few, like bison and moose, survived. Scientists have found mammoth bones with stone spear points stuck in them. In one spot in South Dakota, called the Hot Springs Mammoth Site, they found the remains of over 60 mammoths in a single sinkhole. Some bones show clear-cut marks from human tools. In Australia, the story's even more dramatic. Humans reached Australia around 65,000 years ago. Within a few thousand years, almost every large animal disappeared. Diprotodon, a giant wombat weighing 2 tons. Genyornis, a huge flightless bird. Megalania, a lizard bigger than a saltwater crocodile. All gone. Scientists have found burnt eggshells from these giant birds. The eggs were cooked and eaten by humans. In some caves, there are layers of ash and charcoal that match the timing of the extinctions. Europe and Asia tell a similar story. The cave bear, the woolly rhinoceros, the giant deer, all vanished by the end of the Ice Age. The mammoths held on a little longer in isolated spots. On Wrangel Island in Siberia, a small population of mammoths survived until about 4,000 years ago, after the pyramids were built in Egypt. But even they vanished in the end. South America had its own giants, the giant ground sloth, taller than a grown man when it stood up, the glyptodon, with a shell thick enough to stop arrows, the toxodon, a massive animal that looked like a mix between a hippo and a rhino. When humans arrived, these animals disappeared within a few thousand years. So, what happened? For a long time, people blamed climate change. The end of the Ice Age brought warmer temperatures, melting glaciers and changing habitats. Grasslands turned to forests. Lakes dried up. Maybe the big animals couldn't adapt. But here's the thing. These animals had survived dozens of ice ages before. Cold, warm, dry, wet. They made it through all of them. What was different this time? The main difference was us. Everywhere you look, the timing lines up. Humans arrive, megafauna disappear. In North America, humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge around 15,000 years ago. By 10,000 years ago, the mammoths and their neighbours were gone. In Australia, humans showed up and the giants vanished. In Madagascar and New Zealand, the same pattern. Even on remote islands, big animals lasted until people arrived, then disappeared fast. But was it really us? Or was it just bad luck for the animals? Scientists have argued about this for years. Some say climate change was the main killer, and humans just finished the job. Others say hunting was enough to wipe them out. even if only a few animals were killed each year. There's evidence for both sides. Let's break down the hunting theory first. Imagine a small group of humans hunting mammoths. Each mammoth weighs up to 6 tons. It can feed a village for weeks. You don't need to hunt many each year to make a difference. If people killed even 2% of the population each season, that could be enough to cause a slow but steady decline. And it's not just direct hunting. If you hunt pregnant females or take the healthiest animals, the population can't recover. Adding climate stress and the numbers drop even faster. There's also the overkill hypothesis. This idea says humans swept across new continents, hunting the big animals until they were gone. Archaeologists have found kill sites, where dozens of mammoths or bison were driven into bogs, ravines, or over cliffs. In North America, places like the Folsom and Clovis sites show clear signs of mass hunts. Spear points are found right next to the bones. In some cases, you can see where the animals were butchered and cooked on the spot. But hunting isn't the only explanation. Some scientists point to climate evidence. Around the end of the Ice Age, temperatures rose quickly, forests spread, grasslands shrank, and water sources shifted. Some animals lost their main food. Others couldn't handle the new heat or the changing seasons. There's pollen trapped in lake mud showing big changes in plant life. In Siberia, the mammoth steppe, a huge cold grassland, turned into soggy tundra. Not enough grass for giant grazers. In South America, the rainforests expanded, pushing out the open country animals. Still, the timing is suspicious. In places where humans arrived late, like New Zealand, the big birds called moa survived until people got there. Then, within a few hundred years, all 9 species of moa were wiped out. The same thing happened in Madagascar. The giant elephant birds and huge lemurs survived until humans showed up, then gone. There's also evidence from bones and DNA. In Alaska, scientists found layers of dirt packed with mammoth bones, dated to just before they vanished. Some bones had cut marks from stone, blades. DNA from ancient dung shows the animals were still eating right up until the end. Then, suddenly, the remains stop appearing. It wasn't just hunting and climate. Humans changed the land in other ways. In Australia, there's evidence that people burned huge swathes of land to clear brush and encourage new growth. These fire stick farming practices created open spaces for hunting, but destroyed habitats for some animals. In North America, some scientists think humans set fires to drive animals into traps. These fires could have changed the plant life, making it harder for big animals to find food. Disease might have played a role too. When people and their dogs travelled, they could have brought new illnesses. Big animals that had never faced these germs before might have died quickly. It's hard to find proof, but some sudden die-offs could be explained this way. Let's not forget the smaller animals. While the giants vanished, many smaller creatures survived. Deer, antelope, foxes and rabbits are still around. They breed faster, hide better, and eat a wider range of foods. The big animals were slow to reproduce. A mammoth might have only 1 calf every few years. If something went wrong, bad weather, hunting, fires, the population couldn't bounce back. Some evidence comes from art. Cave paintings in France and Spain are filled with images of bison, horses, mammoths and rhinos. Later, those animals disappear from the art. It's as if the artists were recording the end of an era. In Australia, ancient rock art shows giant animals that no longer exist. These aren't just stories, they're eyewitness accounts. There's also a pattern with timing. In places where humans and megafauna lived together the longest, like Africa, more big animals survived. Elephants, rhinos, hippos, giraffes, they're still around. Why? Maybe African animals evolved alongside humans and learned to be wary. In other places, the giants didn't see humans as a threat until it was too late. Let's talk about what this meant for people. Losing the big animals changed everything. For hunters, it was a crisis. The biggest, easiest sources of food were gone. People had to switch to hunting smaller animals, fishing and gathering plants. This may have pushed humans toward new inventions like traps, bows and arrows and fishing gear. It also forced groups to change how they lived. They moved more often, travelled farther, and sometimes fought with neighbours over the best hunting spots. There are even signs in the bones of people themselves. In some places, skeletons from after the extinctions show more signs of hunger and stress. Teeth with lines from periods of starvation. Bones from people who died young. It wasn't an easy time, but humans adapted. They always do. When the big game was gone, we learned to get by with less. We domesticated dogs to help hunt smaller prey. We made better tools. We learned to use plants in new ways. Grinding, seeds, making flour, storing nuts for the winter. All of these changes help set the stage for farming, herding, and eventually civilization. There's another mystery buried in the DNA. When scientists look at ancient genetic material, they see sharp drops in diversity among big animals right before they vanish. That means their numbers were already shrinking. Maybe changing weather made life hard even before humans arrived. Maybe small, scattered groups of animals were more vulnerable to hunters or disease. It's like a puzzle where every piece matters. Now let's step back. Why does this mass extinction matter so much? For one, it's a lesson about power. Humans didn't just survive in a world of giants. We changed it. We tipped the balance. Before us, the big animals ruled. After us, the world belonged to smaller, quicker creatures, and to people. It's also a warning. The same patterns are still playing out today, just with different animals. Habitat loss, hunting, and climate change threaten species all over the world. The story of the megafauna is a reminder of how quickly things can shift. But there's something else too. The loss of the giants was a turning point for our ancestors. It forced them to rethink everything. No more easy meals, no more simple hunting trips. It was the end of one way of life and the start of another. For a long time, people must have told stories about the lost animals. Maybe they remembered the last mammoth or the last giant sloth. Maybe they painted their memories on cave walls, hoping the animals would return. We still do this in a way. We're drawn to the idea of lost worlds and creatures we'll never see. What's fascinating is how close we came to losing ourselves too. When food sources collapsed, human numbers dropped. Small groups had to rely on each other more than ever. New ideas, new ways of sharing, and new tools became the difference between life and extinction. Some scientists think this struggle shaped who we are. It made us more creative, more social, and more able to adapt. We learned how to solve problems quickly, how to cooperate, how to face new dangers with hope and stubbornness. And here's something to think about. The world after the megafauna was a new world. A world built for people like us. Forests grew where herds once trampled the ground. Rivers changed course. Plants spread. Animals adapted. And humans took center stage. If you walk through certain places today, you can still see the marks of the giants. In Alaska, there are old mammoth trails pressed into the frozen ground. In South America, you can find giant burrows dug by ancient sloths, big enough for a person to crawl inside. In Australia, dried-out lakes hold the bones of animals that vanished long ago. Every time archaeologists dig up a new bone, paint a picture of an extinct animal, or trace an ancient footprint, they're reading the story of this massive shift. It's a story of survival, luck, and change. And yet, there's a strange comfort in knowing we're not just the children of survivors, we're the children of a world that transformed. The end of the megafauna was the start of the human age, Our ancestors stepped into that empty space and made it their own. So when you hear about woolly mammoths or saber-toothed cats, don't just picture them as distant creatures. They were part of our story. Their end was our beginning. Now, as we move forward, there's another question waiting. Why did we survive when so many others didn't? Not just the animals, but the other kinds of humans too. What made our branch of the family tree the one that lasted? That's the next puzzle. The answer might tell us something about what it means to be human. So let's take a step back from the stories of vanished giants and lost cousins. Let's ask a bigger question. Why did we make it when others didn't? Why did our line of humans survive while Neanderthals, Denisovans, and all the rest faded away? This is the heart of the mystery. It's not just about luck. There had to be something real, something different, that helped our ancestors outlast everyone else. There's no single answer. Instead, it's a pile of clues scattered across bones, tools, DNA, and even cave paintings. Each piece gives us a hint, but when you put them all together, you start to see some patterns. One of the biggest ideas is flexibility. Humans who looked like us could adapt in ways no other species could. Not just to cold or heat, but to change itself. If you dropped a group of us into a frozen plain, we'd figure out new clothes, new shelters, new ways to hunt. If you put us in a jungle, we'd eat different foods, make new tools, and learn new dangers. Neanderthals and Denisovans were tough. They lasted hundreds of thousands of years, but their tools and ways of life barely shifted. When the world changed fast, they struggled. Our ancestors, on the other hand, seemed to welcome change. It almost became a habit. Try something new. If it works, keep it. If it fails, try again. Here's another clue. Connections. Modern humans built bigger social networks, not just family groups, but alliances across whole regions. Archaeologists have found seashell beads and stones that travelled hundreds of miles from their source. That means people were trading, sharing stories, and maybe even swapping marriage partners with far-off groups. This web of connections mattered. If your group got wiped out by illness or a storm, you could join another. If you heard about a new tool or a better way to hunt, you could copy it. Information didn't get stuck. It spread. That made everyone stronger. Now let's talk about imagination. This is where things get weird. Around 70,000 years ago, something in our minds shifted. People started making art. Carvings, beads, painted hands on cave walls. They buried their dead with care. They made musical instruments, like flutes from bird bones. This wasn't just about pretty pictures. It was about thinking in symbols, seeing a shape and turning it into a story, dreaming up things that didn't exist yet. That's what made myths possible. That's what let us plan, remember, and hope. The power of imagination goes deeper. Once humans could think in symbols, they could create rules and beliefs. Maybe that's when religion started. When you believe in something bigger than yourself, it can unite a group. It gives people courage when things go wrong. It can also control behavior. If everyone believes in the same spirit or law, they'll work together. That's a huge step up from just following the strongest leader. Language is the glue that held all this together. We don't know exactly when true language appeared, but at some point humans started using words for more than just warning about danger. They could talk about the past, plan for the future, and teach skills to children who hadn't seen the world yet. They could imagine things together, a hunt, a story, a shared dream. Language is what lets us cooperate on a big scale. Not just a small band, but hundreds, even thousands of people moving in the same direction. Some scientists think that language and imagination grew together. The more we talked, the more we dreamed. The more we dreamed, the more we needed words. It's a feedback loop. Each generation gets a little better at thinking, a little better at talking, and suddenly you have a species that can change its world. But there's another layer: memory. Humans are obsessed with remembering, not just facts, but feelings, faces, stories. Our brains are built to hold on to details even when they hurt. That's why we tell stories about the past, good and bad. It's why we pass down warnings and advice. If you remember where the tigers hunt, you live. If you forget, you don't. Other animals remember things, sure, but humans remember in stories. We build meaning around facts. That's how history starts, even before writing. Let's look at tools. Neanderthals made great stone axes and scrapers. They were experts in their own way, but their tools barely change for hundreds of generations. Modern humans, though, never stopped tinkering. If someone found a sharper blade or a better spear, others picked up the trick. The best ideas spread fast. You can see this in the record. Suddenly you get bone needles for sewing, tiny arrowheads, fish hooks, and even things like nets and traps. These aren't just for survival. They're signs of creativity. What about food? Our ancestors were the ultimate opportunists. They ate everything: roots, berries, fish, insects, small mammals, big game. If one food ran out, they switched. They learned to cook with fire, which made more food safe to eat. They even learned to ferment, dry or smoke foods to last through hard times. This diet shift meant they could live almost anywhere. Neanderthals mostly stuck to big game. When the herds were gone, they had trouble finding enough to eat. Our ancestors always had a backup plan. Let's not forget cooperation. It sounds simple, but it's everything. Humans are wired to help each other. Not just family, but strangers too. We hunt together, gather together, care for the sick and the young. If one person is injured, the group makes up for it. That means more people survive. Other species help their own, but humans took it to the next level. We form teams, make long-term plans, and share resources, even when it's risky. There's also a dark side: competition. Our ancestors weren't always peaceful. Sometimes groups fought for food, land, or mates. But even conflict can lead to change. Winners take new ideas. Losers join stronger groups or move on. In the end, this mixing and shifting made us more adaptable. Now let's get into the evidence. Scientists look at DNA to track these changes. When they study bones from old caves, they find signs of mixing. Neanderthals left their mark in our genes. Denisovans too. But only modern humans have this crazy blend from everywhere. That's because we kept moving, meeting and mixing. We didn't stay put. That's rare in nature. There's a strange fact about our genes. When you look at genetic diversity, humans are a weird case. We have less variety than you'd expect for a species spread across the planet. That's the mark of past bottlenecks, population crashes where only a few survived. But inside that small pool, there's a history of mixing, migration, and survival against the odds. Let's talk about children. Modern humans raise kids for longer than almost any other animal. Babies are born helpless. They need years of care. That means parents, grandparents, even aunts and uncles all help. The group has to be stable and supportive. This "it takes a village" style of raising children is a big advantage. It allows knowledge to pass down smoothly. It also lets parents take risks knowing someone else will help with the kids. Here's something often missed: play. Human children play more than almost any other animal. Play isn't just fun. It's training for real life. It teaches teamwork, problem solving, and even how to deal with loss. Imagine a bunch of kids pretending to hunt or gather. They're practicing skills they'll need later. That's a hidden superpower. Now, think about fire. Controlling fire goes way back. But modern humans used it for more than warmth and cooking. They gathered around fires to share stories, bond, and plan. Firelight may have helped our brains develop. It stretched the day, allowing more time for socializing and teaching. It protected against predators. It also let us claim new places: cold mountains, dark caves, wild forests. Let's look at another clue. Clothing. Sewing needles first appear with modern humans. That means real clothing, stitched, fitted, layered, not just animal skins thrown over the shoulders, but warm, workable outfits. This let people move into places Neanderthals never reached. It also allowed for decoration: beads, coloured threads, feathers. Clothing became a way to show identity, status, and even mood. Communication wasn't just words, it was art, music, dance, and ritual. Cave paintings show not just animals but people, handprints, even maps. Some caves have footprints from children dancing in mud. Music echoes from bone flutes and drums. Ritual burials show care for the dead, flowers, painted bones, precious objects laid beside the body. All of this points to a mind that sees beyond the present moment. But why does any of this matter? Here's the thing. Each of these skills, adaptation, imagination, language, memory, cooperation, on their own might not be enough. But together, they made us unstoppable. Our ancestors could move into any new land and figure it out. They could invent new tools and share them. They could remember the past and plan for the future. They could work together, dream together, and even mourn together. It's not that we were the strongest or the fastest or the bravest. We were the most willing to change. That's our real superpower. When disaster struck, volcano, drought, cold, or loss, we didn't just wait it out. We made a new plan. If things got bad, we moved. If a way of hunting stopped working, we tried something else. If a story didn't fit anymore, we told a new one. Here's a wild idea. Maybe being weak, slow, and fragile forced us to become creative. If we'd been born with claws or thick fur, maybe we'd never have needed to invent. Instead, we had to build our own shelter, make our own weapons, and fix our own problems. Every weakness became a reason to try something new. Let's zoom in on the idea of risk. Our ancestors were risk-takers. Every journey out of Africa, every crossing of a mountain or river, was a leap into the unknown. Some groups failed. Others made it through. Over time, the risk-takers left more descendants. That shaped our minds. Even now, humans are curious. We want to know what's over the next hill. We tell stories about explorers, pioneers, and rebels. That urge to find out, to push farther, is part of what saved us. And yet, there's a gentle side. Survival wasn't just about fighting or hunting. It was about kindness. Archaeologists have found skeletons of people who lived with broken bones, blindness, or disease. They survived because someone cared for them. Someone fed them, kept them warm, and protected them from danger. That's not just biology. That's love. Compassion kept the group strong. It meant that even the weakest could add wisdom, stories, and laughter to the group. Let's think about time. Other animals live in the moment. Humans live in all three: past, present, future. We remember, we act, we dream. That's what lets us save food for winter, teach our children, or plan a celebration. It's what lets us build on what came before. Each generation adds something new. Now let's turn to the bigger picture. What did all this add up to? It meant that humans, for the first time, became a force of nature. Not just another animal, but something new. Our choices could reshape the world. Clear forests, build fires, hunt out the giants, and later plant crops and raise animals. The world itself changed in response. But here's where it gets puzzling. If we were so adaptable, so smart, why did it take so long for things to change? Why did we spend almost 200,000 years just surviving, then suddenly leap forward? Some researchers think there's a tipping point. Maybe you need a certain number of people, or a certain kind of language before innovation explodes. Maybe the right mix only happens by chance. Others point to the environment. When things are steady, there's no need to change. When disaster hits, change becomes the only option. The Toba, eruption, the end of the Ice Age, the loss of big game. Each crisis forced new ideas. Maybe our greatest leaps came from our hardest times. There's one last piece to consider: luck. Sometimes survival comes down to being in the right place at the right time. Maybe our ancestors found a safe valley, a patch of coastline with food, or a new plant to eat. Maybe they just avoided the worst dangers by accident. Luck helped, but it wasn't everything. The survivors made the most of their chances. So, why did we make it? The answer is messy, but beautiful. We survived because we were flexible, curious, connected, and kind. We took risks, learned fast, and never stopped telling stories. We remembered those who came before, and we dreamed about those who would come after. Every struggle left a mark on us, sometimes in scars, sometimes in wisdom. What I love about this mystery is that it's still happening. Every time you try something new, reach out to a friend, or wonder about the past, you're part of that same story. The chain of survival stretches from the first humans to you, and that's where this big question leads, from lost worlds and vanished cousins, right up to the edge of your own life. The story isn't finished, you're in it right now. Picture the chain of survival as a real thing, almost like a rope stretching across time. Each person is a link. Some links are thick and strong, others are thin, almost breaking, but every single one matters, or the whole thing falls apart. We're here because the chain never broke, not once in all those years. Let's start at the beginning. Imagine a small group, stuck in a world full of danger. Every day, they wake up not knowing if they'll find food or shelter. They're cold, hungry, and sometimes scared, but they keep going. This is where the story of survival really starts, one day at a time. What's strange is how many times the chain almost snapped. Look at the numbers. There were times when all the humans left could fit inside a single stadium. Maybe only 5,000 people on Earth at one point. That's smaller than most high schools. A flu or a drought could have ended it all. But somehow, someone always found a way through. The evidence for these close calls is hidden in our own DNA. When scientists look at the genes of people from every corner of the world, they see the same patterns. Certain stretches of our DNA are almost identical from person to person. That only happens if our ancestors went through a bottleneck, a time when the population shrank so much that only a few families survived. Every person today is a child of those survivors. But DNA isn't the only clue. There are ancient graves, tiny campsites, and tools scattered across Africa, the Middle East and beyond. Some of these sites are so small it's clear only a handful of people lived there. A cave in South Africa shows signs of people collecting shellfish during a period when the land was dying. They found a new food source just when everything else disappeared. That simple switch, eating clams and mussels, may have saved their group. If they hadn't tried something new, the chain might have snapped there. Now move forward. Picture the first time a small band of humans left Africa for new lands. They didn't know what waited for them. There were deserts, mountains, and rivers to cross. Sometimes the way was blocked by ice or wild animals. Other times they found new places full of life. Each step into the unknown was a gamble. Groups split up. Some vanished without a trace. Others found a way to survive and pass their genes forward. The chain branched out, but never broke. We know this from the way human DNA is spread around the world. People in Australia, for example, share tiny pieces of DNA with people in Siberia and India. That means the chain travelled thousands of miles, over generations, sometimes through places that look impossible to cross. The story is written in the tiniest details, blood types, hair colour, even the way bodies handle certain foods. Let's talk about families. The chain isn't just made of lone heroes, it's built on parents, children, and the people who helped raise them. In ancient camps, archaeologists sometimes find the bones of babies alongside old women and men. That means the group cared for the young and the old. If a child was born weak or a grandparent got sick, the others didn't just leave them. They brought food, shared warmth, and kept the group whole. Think about what that means. Any break in kindness, any time people gave up on each other, could have ended the line, but it didn't. The chain held, not because everyone was strong, but because they stuck together. Now zoom in on a small detail. A broken bone. In one famous cave, scientists found a skeleton with a shattered leg. The injury would have made walking impossible for months, but the bone healed. That means someone carried this person, fed them, and protected them from danger. This wasn't just survival of the fittest, it was survival of those who looked after each other. Compassion kept the chain strong. Evidence for teamwork shows up everywhere. Stone tools found at some sites are made from rocks that come from far away, maybe 100 miles or more. That means people met up with other groups, traded and shared secrets. Every time two bands of humans came together, the chain got stronger. If one group failed, the other could help. If a new tool was invented, it spread. The chain didn't just hold, it grew. Another important link is memory. Early humans didn't have writing, but they remembered things, a dangerous animal's tracks, the taste of a safe route, the shape of a storm in the distance. This memory was passed down through stories, songs, and watching elders. If someone forgot a key piece of knowledge, it could mean disaster. But as long as the stories kept flowing, the chain stayed unbroken. Sometimes, the chain almost failed because of the weather. There were cold snaps that lasted for generations. Whole regions turned to desert. But every time, the survivors found a new path. In one area, archaeologists found traces of ancient fires and caves high in the mountains. People had moved up, away from the dying plains, and learned to live among rocks and snow. They made new clothes, built better shelters, and waited for the world to warm up again. There are even signs of humans escaping disaster by heading to the coast. In South Africa, shell middens, piles of discarded shells, show that people gathered seafood when nothing else was left. These piles grow deeper in times when the rest of the land was dry. By turning to the ocean, they bought themselves enough time for the climate to shift. The chain held because of simple choices: what to eat, where to move, who to trust. Here's something you might not expect. Some of the strongest links in the chain are invisible. They're the habits, beliefs, and hopes our ancestors carried. The rituals they performed, the songs they sang at night, even the little charms carved from bone or stone. These things didn't put food on the table or chase away predators, but they gave people meaning. When things got tough, belief in something, luck, spirits, ancestors, helped them keep going. Faith wasn't just comfort. Sometimes it was survival. Let's look at children again. Human babies are born helpless. It takes years before they can walk, talk, or find food on their own. That's a risk. But it's also a chance to learn. The long childhood gives the brain time to soak up everything: how to make tools, who to trust, what to avoid. If the chain had broken here, if no one taught the next generation, everything would have been lost. Instead, each child became a new link, ready to carry the story forward. The chain isn't just about blood. Sometimes people joined new groups. Maybe they lost their family to hunger or war. Maybe they wandered in from another land. If the group welcomed outsiders, the chain got stronger. New ideas, new genes, new hope. This openness is rare in nature. Many species chase off strangers, but humans have a long history of mixing, sharing, and starting over. That's why the chain is so long and tangled but still whole. Let's circle back to risk. There are times in the record when humans made wild leaps, crossing open water to reach an island, climbing into freezing mountains, hunting animals much larger than themselves. Each time the risk was huge. Some groups failed, but the ones who made it became new links in the chain. Their courage changed what was possible for everyone who came later. Here's a strange twist. Sometimes, disaster made the chain stronger. When a volcano wiped out the land, or a disease swept through, the survivors adapted fast. Maybe they learned to eat new foods, or build different shelters, or form new alliances. The chain bent but didn't break. Over time, these hard moments forced humans to get smarter, more creative, and more connected. Evidence for these jumps is everywhere. In Europe, tools suddenly get more complex after the Ice Age. In Australia, people learn to manage fire, shaping the land to their needs. In the Americas, hunters track giant animals across frozen plains, then switch to fishing and gathering when the giants disappeared. Each change is a new link, hammered out by need and chance. Let's not forget the quiet links, the people whose names we'll never know, the mother who shared her food, the elder who told a story that saved a child's life, the friend who risked crossing a river to find help. Their choices didn't make headlines, but without them, the chain would have snapped. Survival is built on small acts day after day. Now think about migration. Humans didn't just move once or twice. The chain is full of journeys across deserts, over mountains, through forests and grasslands. Each trip meant new dangers, but also new chances. Sometimes people found rich valleys or rivers full of fish. Sometimes they hit dead ends. But every time a group moved and survived, they added another stretch to the chain, reaching farther across the world. The evidence for these migrations shows up in language too. Words for certain plants or animals are found in faraway places, showing how ideas and stories travelled. Even lullabies and myths echo across continents, carrying pieces of the old world into the new. Every language is a thread in the chain, twisted together with memory and hope. Trade is another link. Long before cities or money, people swapped goods. Shells, stones, coloured pigments, and special foods all moved across huge distances. This wasn't just about getting new stuff. It was about building trust, meeting strangers, and learning from them. Trade made the chain flexible. If one place ran out of something, another could fill the gap. That meant fewer breaks, more chances for survival. Death was always close. Sometimes whole groups disappeared. The chain got thin, stretched almost to breaking. But as long as one person made it through, one mother, one child, one wanderer, the story kept going. That's why every human alive now is the end of a line that never snapped. Now, let's look at art. Cave paintings, carvings, and beads show up just after the hardest times. When people made these things, they weren't just passing the time, they were saying, "Yo, we're still here." Art is evidence that the chain wasn't just about surviving. It was about living, sharing, and remembering. When you paint your hand on a wall, you're reaching out to the future, hoping someone will see it. That's a link as real as any bone or tool. Music and rhythm are part of the chain too. In caves, archaeologists found flutes made from bird bones. Maybe people played them to calm children, or to bring hope during long nights. Music helps groups stay together. It's harder to be scared when you're singing with others. That's a small but powerful link. Let's not forget mistakes. Sometimes the chain almost broke because of bad choices, overhunting, fighting, or ignoring changes in the land. But humans learned from failure. They watched, remembered, and tried again. The chain is full of lessons, paid for in hardship but never lost. Sometimes the chain was tested by things no one could control. Floods, earthquakes, diseases. Each time fate rolled the dice. But the same pattern shows up. Those who shared, adapted, and cared for each other made it through. The chain is not just made of bone and blood, but of trust. What about today? The chain didn't end in the past. Every choice you make, every story you hear is a new link. The chain runs through your parents, your teachers, your friends, even strangers whose lives touched yours in small ways. It's easy to forget how fragile it all is. But every good deed, every lesson handed down makes the chain a little stronger. Here's what I keep wondering about. If one person long ago had given up, if they hadn't tried a new food, or helped a friend, or dared to cross a river, would you be here now? Probably not. That's what makes the chain of survival so strange and powerful. It's built from millions of tiny moments, each one just enough to keep going. We're the result of all those risks, all that kindness, all those experiments. The chain is still growing every day. It links you to every survivor, every innovator, every storyteller who ever lived. So when you think about the past, remember this. You're not just looking back. You're holding the end of the chain. And the story isn't finished yet. It stretches forward, through you, into the future, waiting for the next link. So what do we actually take away from all of this? Why does it matter how close our ancestors came to disappearing, or how many times they almost lost the thread? Here's what stands out when you look at the big picture. Survival, for humans, has always been about more than just outlasting the storm. It's about learning, changing, and connecting in ways that go deeper than just staying alive. Look at how many times people were pushed to the edge. There were disasters, cold snaps, and times when the world itself seemed to turn against them. But humans kept pushing forward, not just by being tough, but by figuring out new ways to handle whatever the world threw at them. When the climate shifted, so did they. When one food vanished, they tried another. When an old way of doing things stopped working, they invented something new. Compare that to other creatures from the same time. Woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, even other humans like Neanderthals and Denisovans. All gone. They couldn't keep up with change. They didn't have the same tricks up their sleeves. Our ancestors, though, made a habit of adapting. They didn't wait for things to get better. They tried, failed, and tried again. But here's something even more interesting. It wasn't just about brains or tools. It was about people, about groups, families, and strangers working together. Whenever you find a clue from ancient times, a healed bone, a shared meal, a piece of art, it's a sign that someone cared enough to help another person. That compassion, more than anything, might be what kept the chain from snapping. Let's talk about risk for a minute. Every big advance in our story started with someone taking a chance, crossing a new river, eating a strange plant, trusting a new person. Sometimes those risks paid off, sometimes they failed, but every time they added something new to the story. It's the willingness to try that sets humans apart, not because they knew it would work, but because they were willing to see what would happen. Trade is another thing that makes humans different. Even before money, people swapped things, not just goods, but ideas, stories, and skills. When two groups met, they didn't always fight. Sometimes they traded. That made both sides stronger. It also meant that if one group learned something new, like how to make a sharper tool or find food in a tough season, that knowledge could travel far. One smart idea could save hundreds of lives, even in places the inventor never saw. You also see something else: hope. When you look at cave paintings, carvings, or the beads people wore, you're seeing more than just decoration. You're seeing proof that even in the hardest times, humans wanted to make something beautiful. They wanted to leave a mark, to tell the future, we were here. That sort of hope doesn't show up in bones or tools, but it's just as real. Memory is another hidden strength. Early humans couldn't write down what worked and what didn't. So they told stories, they sang songs, they watched and learned from the old ones, in their group. If someone forgot a lesson, it could be deadly. But as long as people listened and remembered, the group could survive even the worst disasters. Now, think about the times when things almost fell apart, when groups shrank to almost nothing, when whole regions emptied out. It would have been easy to give up, to stop trusting, to close off from strangers. But the chain kept going in part because people stayed open. They let others join. They welcomed outsiders and learned from them. That openness kept the story moving forward. Some of the most important changes happened in silence. A new tool, a different way to cook food, a better way to build shelter. Most of those ideas didn't come from leaders or heroes. They came from regular people, testing things out, sharing what worked. Survival was a team effort. There were no solo winners. Everyone depended on everyone else. There's also something to be said for stubbornness. Humans aren't the biggest, fastest, or strongest animals, but they are some of the most persistent. When there was no guarantee of food, shelter, or safety, they kept moving. They kept searching for new answers, even when the old ones failed. That grit, more than any tool or weapon, might be the real secret. Of course, luck played its part. Sometimes the difference between life and death was pure chance. A storm that missed a camp, a herd that wandered close, a disease that faded away. But luck alone doesn't explain everything. The pattern is clear. The people who adapted, shared, and looked after each other did better. Their lines survived when others faded away. What about today? The dangers have changed, but the basics haven't. We still need each other. We still face new risks. We still have to choose what to remember, what to try, and when to help. The lessons of the past aren't just old stories. They're blueprints for how to make it through whatever comes next. Think about this. Every person alive is proof that someone somewhere made the right call when it mattered. Someone chose to share food instead of hoard it. Someone braved a dark forest or a frozen plain. Someone remembered a story, taught a skill, or took in a stranger. That's the real miracle. Maybe that's why history, even the oldest and darkest parts, feels personal. It's not just about other people in far-off times. It's a story that leads right up to you. The chain isn't finished. You're holding it right now. Every choice you make, every story you pass on becomes part of what's next. So, what does it mean to be human after 200,000 years? It means carrying the memory of survival. It means being willing to change. It means helping others, even when it's risky or hard. It means hoping for more than just getting by. It means making beauty, even when the world feels empty. When you look at all those close calls, the disasters, the migrations, the inventions, the acts of kindness, it's clear. We're not here because we're the smartest or strongest. We're here because we kept moving forward together. We're the children of survivors, risk-takers, and dreamers. That's the real story of how our ancestors survived the impossible. And it's not over. The chain goes on, stretching into tomorrow, waiting for the next link only you can make.